All right, biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of all the species of living organisms on the planet. And it is threatened worldwide. There are a tremendous number of species going extinct, and even more that are endangered or threatened. Endangered means that the populations are getting to the point where they could go extinct very quickly. Threatened means that they're on the verge of becoming endangered. Here are some definitions. High risk of extinction. Last animal has perished. Vulnerable, likely to become extinct in the more distant future. Threatened is likely to become endangered. And there are a lot of different species it gives here that are close to extinction. This Sumatran rhino actually is now extinct. We've lost that. The last one of that species died. Rhinos are primarily harvested by people who thought that there are medicinal uses for rhino horn and to use in making handles for ceremonial knives that families own in the Middle East. It's a rhino handled knife and it has specific cultural significance. But the last species have been eliminated. CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. It's an international treaty to prevent species from becoming endangered or extinct. And it tries to regulate international trade of animal and plant species. Any trade in protected plant and species has to be sustainable based on sound biological understanding and principles. So you need various permits, and you have to follow certain guidelines. The Lacey Act combats trafficking in illegal wildlife. The 2008 Farm Bill, the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008, amended the Lacey Act by expanding its protection to a broader range of plants and plant products. The Lacey Act now, among other things, makes it unlawful to import certain plants and plant products without an import declaration. It also makes certain species of animal illegal. Amphibian extinction. At least 1/3 of the world's known amphibian species are threatened. Up to 122 species have become extinct just in the past 25 years. And 427 are critically endangered. These are a indicator species. They are very, very susceptible to environmental disruption, pollution, etc. They don't tolerate a lot of encroachment into their habitat. Amphibians, however, as we have studied them, have produced some very interesting chemicals. Anti-inflammatory compounds, anti-tumor properties, antibiotics, adhesives. And that's the problem with a species going extinct. When it goes extinct, its genome goes extinct. And its genome goes extinct, and whatever various chemicals that the body produces naturally might disappear. And you'd be surprised how many different chemicals and compounds used in medicine and industry come from animals. Why is it happening? Well, habitat loss and fragmentation. They run a road through a migration route of frogs or toads as they migrate to try to get to water to reproduce. That's fragmentation. Chemical pollutants, any kinds of agricultural mining pollutants will kill huge numbers. And even things like pharmaceuticals that we flush down the toilet or wash down the drain has a direct impact on very sensitive and semi-permeable creatures. Invasive species have outcompeted them or are eating them. And then there's a disease, a type of fungus that is causing amphibian population declines. Now, where the disease came from and why is it expanding so rapidly. Maybe the animal's immune system is being stressed by habitat loss and pollutants in its environment, and so it's not as capable of fighting off infections or disease as it normally would be. This chapter is going to explain some of that: habitat loss, pollution, climate change, invasive species, and overexploitation. Deforestation. It's a major threat. Grasslands and forests are destroyed to make room for farms. Urban sprawl. Deforestation removes trees, has several implications. Forests provide habitats, absorb large amounts of CO2, and release oxygen and water into the atmosphere. As we get more people, we got to feed them. So we rip down forests to plant crops or raise food animals. Urbanization eliminates many habitats and affects nearby habitats. And cities no longer build up, they spread out. Look at how many strip centers there are. Let's take, for example, here in Gallatin, Tennessee, where we live. There are 2 McDonald's within a mile or so of each other, so that you don't have to drive an extra 3 to 5 minutes to go to a McDonald's. All right. And this urban sprawl basically spreads pollution and destroys habitat. Lumber industry, clear cutting. Basically, they just come through with bulldozers and rip everything down and use a small percentage of the trees they rip down, and then they pile up the other ones and burn them or dispose of them in some way. Here's an aerial view of an area that was clear cut. Most of even our national forests are clear cut by various lumber companies. When you're driving like on an interstate or a highway and you see that you've entered a national forest, if what these companies do, they leave about 100 to 150 yards of forest next to the road so that you don't see all the clear cut behind it. Because if people don't see it, they don't get upset by it. Now, lumber companies like to say, yes, we're replanting trees. But basically, they don't replant diversity. They replant the species that they want to harvest in the future. So they turn national forests into a type of lumber agriculture. And so here's an example of a replanted forest, but it's all the exact same tree and they're all spread out. Only 1% of temperate forests remain in North America since the Europeans arrived. What do we need the lumber for? Well, McMansions, right? McMansions represent a lot of problems. They are packed in tight like sardines. There's no yards or places for people to enjoy the outside. They tend to be kind of shabbily built. They don't have the lasting power of some of the older houses. Most of them use a lot of glue board and particle board to construct them. And they tend to be much higher end because a builder can make more money from a more expensive house. Now, smaller houses, starter homes, and this is a problem we're experiencing here in Middle Tennessee. Basically, there's a progression in your life of where you live. When you first get started, you usually rent an apartment and save your money for a down payment. You buy a starter home, you live in there for 5 or 10 years. As you're getting raises and promotions in your job, you're saving money and you're building equity in your house, so then you can sell that house and use that as a down payment on a larger house because now you have a family, you have kids, etc. But they're not building starter homes in Middle Tennessee, and it is causing rents and prices of home to skyrocket. In the past 10 years, houses have doubled in price, which is making it very difficult for people to move to the next level. Why McMansions? Property tax revenue is going to be higher, so why zone for starter homes for homes that are worth $150,000 when you can zone for larger homes that are worth $300,000? Okay. And then a lot of houses are being bought up by big corporations that they want to rent because they can make more money from renting homes. Makes it harder. It soaks up the number of available homes for people to purchase. So again, another problem. Downside, shortage of starter homes, luxury apartments. These are really a problem too, because instead of having a good basic apartment where you can get a reasonable rent, they put all these amenities in there so they can crank up the rents and make more money, and it doesn't really cost that much, putting in pools and et cetera, et cetera. Farming, deforestation, urbanization, shrinking Earth's natural habitats. We manipulate water for recreation, for agriculture. This golf course is out of place in the desert. Huge amount of water is redirected to keep the ponds full and the grass green. And it's in a habitat that it's a desert because there isn't much water there. So if we're using, and eventually we're hitting critical mass in a lot of these southern areas in the Southwest, where are they going to get the water when the water starts to run out? Okay, and it is already doing it. Green lawns, that's what we want it to look like, and that takes a lot of water to make your home look like that. Okay. Now, in some parts of like Arizona and New Mexico, you're not allowed to have things like that. You have to xeriscape. That means you put naturally occurring drought-resistant plants that are native to the area. This is in New Mexico. And then you put down gravel. And these don't take a lot of watering. You know, cactus and succulents. So this habitat, this is in Arizona. It's not a good place for this. There's not enough water for these people. And reservoirs and dammed rivers are starting to run slower. Underground aquifers are draining their water. Affects nutrient cycling, migrating species of animals, etc. Here's a dam in China. This is probably the worst. This is the best example of a really poor dam. Now, China is also a great argument for the Environmental Protection Agency. China has zero environmental regulations. Okay, you can throw pollution any place you want in China and you are not responsible for any of it. And this is trash at their dam. And this guy's trying to clean the trash up, but the water is filthy, but yet people get their drinking water from that dam. Plastic pollution. Plastic is a great stuff. However, it doesn't break down. It's a large molecule that's artificial. There's nothing that naturally breaks it down, and causes problems with both animals and habitats. And a lot of countries don't put stuff in landfills. They put it just out in the ocean. They have big barges and they go out in the ocean and dump it all and try to use the ocean. In the Pacific, we have what is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Here it is from the satellite. These are huge patches of plastic. That's what it looks like from under the water. And this is on the surface of the ocean out there. Okay. Here's an example. Microbeads. They used to put these in creams and stuff like that to help exfoliate. And these little polyethylene beads don't break down. Now, apricot shells and cocoa beans will. These don't. And they started finding out in the Great Lakes, divers would go down and find layers of these microbeads literally 8, 10, 12 feet deep, because they were collecting through the sewage being dumped into the Great Lakes in huge numbers, and they'll never break down. Here's some examples of some different stuff. Disposable diapers, right? Nobody likes to wash cloth diapers, so we use huge numbers of these disposable diapers, and they tend to last about 450 years before they're broken down. Plywood, 1 to 3 years. Plastic bags, 10 to 20 years. Bottles, 450 years. I mean, These large artificial things take a long time to decompose. Now, China has had industrial growth just going through the roof. They are an economic powerhouse because of their industry. And here is the Yangtze River. And no, the Yangtze River should not be red. These are pollutants in the water. This person is gathering water, okay, to use for drinking and washing purposes. A lot of people get their water, they draw it directly from the river. And there is nothing to stop these big companies from doing it. And that's the way it used to be in the United States. Our rivers got so polluted at one point that the Cuyahoga River in Ohio actually caught fire and burned for days because of all the oil, distillates, and chemicals in the water. So the water burned, okay? And they're trying to spray more water on the water that's burning. Air pollution, here's some wonderful pictures from China. People wearing masks just so they can try to breathe. And that's causing all kinds of lung cancers, etc. And what fuels all this economic growth in China? Well, we do. Our consumer-based economy and attitudes, we want stuff. And we buy huge amounts of stuff at Walmarts and things like that. Even clothes are becoming a problem. Because now a lot of people will buy clothes and wear them once or twice. And then they'll try to donate them to like a Goodwill. And a lot of those can't be resold. And they end up either going into landfills or they package them up and ship them to other countries and sell them secondhand there. But that basically hurts the economy of the other countries. Everything's connected. And there are no simple answers. That's the gist of this chapter. Compromises have to be made. The Chinese workers, there you go. That's their life. They live in these cramped barracks. They don't even have a place to go eat. They have to go back to their bunk and eat. They have the bars, and they put nets down there because so many of them try to commit suicide because they're so depressed and unhappy working in these factories where they're basically slaves. We've even started finding these letters in Chinese that are smuggled into boxes of manufactured goods. Workers pleading for help because of the bad work conditions. All right. And companies get around this problem by they will say, okay, we don't buy from bad factories. Okay? We buy from this factory and we send inspectors down there every 4 times a year. Well, they know that the inspectors are coming, so any real atrocities are covered up. And the factory they might actually buy the product from is just an assembly point. Where all the parts are made are where the real atrocities occur. And, you know, basically it's almost like slavery in some of these factories coming out of China and other third world nations. China's not third world, though. The Environmental Protection Agency, there's a lot of people complain about it. Does it limit economic growth? Yeah, it probably does. Okay. But that may not be a bad thing. All right. You have to make a balance between clean water and a clean environment and pollution and money. Now, the people primarily pushing the agenda about the EPA, they hide themselves in these high-sounding named associations that they claim they're grassroots. They're just the common people wanting to keep the EPA from limiting their economic expansion. But then when you look a little deeper, you find most of these organizations are primarily funded by multi-billionaire industrialists, and they just don't want to pay extra money. They want, I mean, to them, $20 billion a year is just not enough money. They need to make more, you know, and that's a problem. I think that the fact that we allowed our rivers to catch fire and burn. Or personally, I don't want my rivers looking like this. I don't want my air looking like that. If that means things are going to be a little bit more expensive, so be it. I will pay that price so that I can have clean water and clean air. Pollution degrades habitats. It's any chemical, physical, or biological change in the environment. Water pollution threatens aquatic life in a lot of ways. Nitrogen, phosphorus are essential elements. Too much can be harmful, but we use huge amounts of these as fertilizers for the agricultural areas to grow more food. Eutrophication occurs because of pollution, and basically nutrients boost the reproduction of algae, which sucks all the oxygen out of the water as it goes through its life cycle and dies, and decomposing things suck oxygen out. And it makes oxygen poor water. It can't sustain much life, so productivity of the fisheries in those areas declines. Okay. If you look, this is the Mississippi Basin, the upper Mississippi all the way down to New Orleans. And there's a lot of dams on these rivers, etc. But there's a lot of, there's the Missouri River, Arkansas, Red River. Anyways, these are areas where a lot of agriculture occurs, and they use a lot of phosphates and nitrogens, and those are fertilizers, and they're being washed down the river into this big dead zone that's growing in the Gulf of Mexico. These used to be shrimp fisheries, and because all these nutrients come in, the green algae explodes, and as it dies, it sinks and decomposes and sucks the water. And so there's this big, huge area outside of Louisiana, around Louisiana and the ports there, that nothing's alive in there. It's all dead because of overuse of fertilizers, and then it gets washed into the rivers and taken down. In addition, when you have, like, here's a river in, I think that's, where is that? I think that might be in Mexico. All of these things are leaching chemicals into the water. Okay, and these chemicals biomagnify in the ecosystem. Weapon or convenience. Here's the little 6-pack holders, little plastic holders. Well, the intent of the thing was to make it easier to carry groups of sodas home, basically. And here's what happens. You throw them away, they get into the water supply, get out into the ocean, dumped into the ocean, and animals get ensnared in them. Seals. And end up dying. You can avoid that. If you're going to get these, before you throw them away, just snip them. It takes an extra 3 or 4 seconds. And but a lot of people would be surprised at how I just don't have the time for that. Well, you know, you should probably make the time, because the same people that don't have the time for this are the ones that talk about how much they love their animals, and they just believe, you know, animals should be free and happy because they think nature is a beautiful, wonderful place. And in a way it is, but it's also hard and cruel. And this kind of stuff that we're throwing out there, that doesn't look like a very happy seal. He's free. That sea lion looks pretty unhappy. The duck, the turtle, the dolphin, none of these animals look very happy. And yet they're ensnared by these things thrown away by people who just love all these animals. This is Los Angeles. Air pollution causes a lot of damage. It's plagued with smog, which is a visible air pollution. Los Angeles is like a big bowl. Okay. Fossil fuels, when you release them, sulfur and nitrogen oxides and things like that, they mix with the rain and turn the rain very, very acid, and it will kill forests, damage vehicles. The Clean Air Act is helping to alleviate that, but it is a little bit more expensive to do that. And you have to basically treat your smoke and stuff coming out of the smokestack industries, and make sure that you filter this stuff out. And that raises the cost of the products, so I get that. But the resulting damage it does, it's going to cost more to repair the damage than we're saving on the products. Here's the ozone hole. Okay. CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, primarily, like an example would be the Freon that they put in air conditioners. They have other things now. But this hole in the ozone layer keeps us from being roasted by ultraviolet radiation coming from the sun. Without the ozone layer, you won't be able to expose your skin to any sunlight because you will get skin cancer in a matter of hours if the ozone's gone. And then basically what happens, the greenhouse effect is occurring. CO2 takes a long time to break down. And so the more carbon we pull out of the ground and then release it into the air because of burning it and using it, the amount of carbon dioxide starts causing certain amounts of heat to be unable to exist. There's this layer of CO2 that's increasing in the atmosphere, and it traps heat in. And so we're seeing increases in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and we're seeing an increase in the average temperature of the climate, decade by decade. And here we've been measuring CO2 quite a lot since, here's 1980. This is when we first really started monitoring it. We noticed it in the 60s, and as it has continued to rise, and now some people will argue, oh, it's a hoax, it's being released naturally from volcanoes. But if you do the math, figure out how much CO2 is being released by a car, multiply that by the number of cars on the planet, come up with metric tonnage on that, and look at the average metric tonnage of a volcano, it's very clear that we are contributing CO2 in large amounts to the atmosphere. Trucks, trains, fires we set to clear land, fires we set to burn trash. The numbers are limitless. Right? And so as the average temperature is going up, we're seeing ice melt. And as ice melts, the oceans rise. Now, we don't see it that much in the United States. It's not as apparent to us, but there are a couple of good examples here in the United States. The city of Miami just finished a $250 billion project to develop sumps and pumps because it's so close to sea level. It's actually a little below, and so they're constantly pumping water out of Miami to keep it from going underwater. Okay, but as the oceans continue to rise, it's going to be a problem. There's an island in Louisiana where 20 people live, and the island is getting submerged. Okay, that's just all it's the sea levels are rising, and they want the federal government to spend $300 or $400 billion to build levees around their island so that their homes don't get underwater, but yet those same people deny climate change, even though it is submerging their homes. Now, the federal government did offer to buy their homes from them and evacuate them, but they don't want to do that because that would be cheaper. 30 people, and those houses aren't very nice houses, and they're not, their market value isn't very high, so you could buy those and let those people leave, but they don't want to leave. They want all of us to chip in to help keep their island from going underwater. If the water increases by 6 meters, which would happen if the ice at the poles melted, or the majority of it, Greenland, huge lake of liquid water now held in a big bowl in Greenland where the snow has been melting. If that all releases at once, that could be a problem. But this would show some of the areas that would go underwater, okay, along our coastline. New Jersey, Delaware, Washington, D.C., New York City, Manhattan. Manhattan would go underwater. Even the tropics are vulnerable. Higher temperatures increase evaporation, and you get a lot of this cloud cover. It's altering weather patterns, and we're seeing a lot of species going extinct because of it. Let's talk about exotic species. We import huge numbers of plants for the ornamental plant industry because people want to put plants around their yard or whatever. And here's one, kudzu. It often will bring in pests that our native plants don't have any resistance to, any way to fight them. And the kudzu grows like 12 inches a day, and it just smothers native plants. Here's a big kudzu field. Okay. And you can't hardly get rid of that stuff. You know, you could burn it down, I guess. Zebra mussels. These have been a problem in the Great Lakes. Basically, European cargo ships purged their bilges in the Great Lakes, and the larvae of these got out, and now these are actually blocking intakes to water intake pipes for treatment to be distributed as a water supply. The Everglades, a lot of problems. And the problems here lie in people who buy pets irresponsibly. If you choose to buy a pet, that pet is yours, and it is your responsibility to care for it, take care of it, and keep it in a home, okay, until it dies. Now, if you can't find somebody to keep, you know, these Oscars get huge, and you just don't want to keep them anymore and nobody wants them, then you're going to have to euthanize those animals. You don't go turn them loose. That causes massive damage, and Florida is suffering. These are giant water monitors. These are fairly easy to control. They build these big burrows, and once or twice a year, the Florida Fish and Game go out with shotguns and kill these giant lizards. They're 8 or 9 feet long. Burmese pythons, they're a problem. Trying to get those controlled and keeping them from spreading. Green iguanas have just overrun Florida. They tried to make them completely illegal, but that was turned down. Now, you can eat iguanas, but Americans aren't going to eat iguanas. That's not going to happen. Plecostomus, these are fish that you buy in your aquarium and you throw them away. There's a mynah bird. Here's a red-tailed catfish. You know, for some reason, people like to get fish that get big, and then they buy fish that get so big they can't possibly keep them. And they don't want to kill, you know, Benny my fish, and nobody wants them because there's so many of them. And so, well, I'm just tired of cleaning the tank, or I don't want to buy a bigger aquarium or whatever, so I'm just going to go throw it in the local lake, and there you go. They reproduce. There are huge flocks down in Austin, Texas, of these Quaker parakeets, and they're destructive. Here's some different cichlids, clown knifefish. There's a good established population of brown basilisk lizards in Florida. Here's arowana. These are all sold as little 1-inch cute fish, and then they grow into these big monsters. Arowana can get 9 or 10 feet long. These guys can get 6 or 7 feet long. Okay, and now a lot of you are probably looking at this going, well, you know, gosh, I don't like, you know, fish scaly stuff. Let's get rid of it. But wild horses are the same. They are an invasive species. Okay, they're all descended from European domestic animals, and they do pose a problem because they exist in areas that are not very productive. These pastures don't grow a lot of grass. Okay, and there are other things that need to eat that grass. These are all over the Southwest, and the Bureau of Land Management controls them, and they try to control the numbers. They go out and catch them, and they will, geld the males. They round up a bunch every year and try to give them away to people. All the people that just love having the horses there, but they don't ever want to come and take them. And so they euthanize them. They are on a plan now to slowly, basically, they're rounding them up. They're trying to round all of them up and geld the males and sterilize the females so that as they die off, they can't reproduce, because this has been a problem. Wild horses. Okay, but horses are pretty, they're furry, they're fuzzy. We like horses, so we don't want to see those go because it's fun to see a wild horse. Well, it's no different than a Burmese python in the Everglades. Plain and simple. And people complain. Range, most of that land out there is rented by ranchers. And ranchers rent it to graze cattle. And the range is so poor that the horses cause an economic impact on the ranchers. So they don't want the horses eating the grass that they rented, because the way they look at it, I paid for it, it's my grass now, and I don't want horses eating it. Well, I can kind of see that, but there are other species out there that are eating it. There are some bison and pronghorn and some stuff like that, and that's going to be a part of the cost of doing business. But an invasive species, you should be able to probably get rid of those if you want them. Okay? Proponents of wild horses say they should be a cost absorbed by the ranches because they pay so little to rent the land, and that is true. The average cost of renting the land, if it's privately owned, runs, and this is basically how much per month. Okay, so this is the price to graze one cow and one calf or equivalent animals for 1 month on private land. The BLM price is much lower. Okay, so it's subsidized to help ranchers get access to land, but that has went to extremes because certain ranchers are now claiming, well, I've been renting this land for so many years, so now I should own it. Well, that would be like you having a house that you rent for income, and the person rents it for long enough and they finally decide, well, I've been paying rent on it so long, so I'm just going to own it. And you're like, no, you didn't buy it, you rented it. Okay, I didn't put the house up for sale, I put it up for rent. And you can't have it. But these people have decided because they've been renting there, and so they don't pay the rent. And when the Bureau of Land Management, they give them warning after warning, say, hey, you've got this much back rent on this land, you're going to have to pay it, or we're going to take you to court and we'll sue you. Well, then they get a little radical, and there was recently a couple big cases out west there where these people just feel like, well, that's government land and I've been using it, so it's mine. Well, okay, if we're going to all get free government land, I want the White House. Okay, why can't I have the White House? If they can have 1,000 acres out in Montana, why can't I have some land? I want free land. Okay, and everything that's government, clearly, because they claim the government can't own land. Well, okay, so you're telling me the government doesn't own the White House, doesn't own the Capitol, doesn't own the Pentagon, doesn't own military bases. Well, then, by gosh, I want one. If they get one, why can't I have one? Well, because life doesn't work that way. Okay? These horses are competing with native species like pronghorn, mule deer, elk, javelina. These introduced species doesn't mean it should be maintained at the expense of native or commercial species. There has to be a better biological reason. Okay? And so horses will eventually be gone from the American Southwest. And while some people might think it is sad, it doesn't belong there. Okay? Now, vegans recommend eliminating beef in the diet. Okay? And they're certainly welcome to do that. But some of the more radical vegans would like to make it illegal for anyone to eat meat. I don't really agree with that at all, because I don't think it's as easy to get a healthy diet that way. But that's just me. But if we did all become vegans, then we would have to euthanize all the food animals because they would no longer be needed. And they would be taking up resources that we could use for other things. We could raise native species as food animals. The bison. Bison is actually a healthier meat than beef, and there are bison burgers. There are places you can get bison burgers. And these will produce more meat on the hoof than domestic cows will for the same amount of land. So that might be something, but we would just have to get used to eating bison instead of beef. And the question is it fair to keep one invasive species because you like them even though they harm the habitat, and then support removing other invasive species that you don't like, or is that being hypocritical? And that's a really good thought, and something you should give some thinking to. Overexploitation, a lot of it, the basically tigers, various parts of tigers are used. The skins and other organs are used in homeopathic medicines. Managing our fisheries would be helpful. We could manage our fisheries and get to an area where we could take harvests and then allow the fisheries to maintain at a certain level. And by managing them, we could probably increase the harvest without making the fish go extinct. Bald eagles almost went extinct. A lot of our birds almost went extinct, primarily because of DDT when we passed laws making that illegal. A lot of species of birds rebounded. What DDT did, it biomagnified, and by the time it got to birds, it would make the egg shells rather, so thin that when they try to sit on them and incubate them, they would crack. So we eliminated that. Preserving critical habitat. If we're going to dam a stream or a river, we need to make a way for migrating fish to get around those dams. Some conservation efforts target individual species. Ecotourism provides a financial incentive to keep certain species alive. A lot of people like to do these African safaris, and they go out to these resorts in Africa and they go out and observe the wildlife. And I understand Africa is one of my favorite places in the world, but it has gotten so dangerous that it's sad. So I won't be going anytime soon. These are some of the species that have went extinct fairly recently. This is a golden frog from Costa Rica. I actually, when I was younger, in the 80s, went to Costa Rica and found populations of these and counted them and reported the numbers, and they have now disappeared. This is the thylacine. It is a marsupial in Australia that is extinct. The Baiji dolphin is a freshwater dolphin in China that has gone. The Pyrenean ibex. The Pyrenees are the mountains between France and Spain. These have all been hunted out. They're trying to reestablish these by cloning DNA from preserved specimens. The West African black rhino's gone. We're all the gorillas, the orangutans. This is the giant leatherback turtle, the Sumatran elephant. These are almost gone. A lot of them will go extinct. Biotechnology might help us recover them, and we are developing embryo banks from gorillas and orangutans and a lot of these different things. We're getting for a possible reintroduction effort. Biodiversity can be recoverable. There's a lot of ways you can make, even if you have a yard, make it a resource area for wildlife. And I'm not talking about deer. Deer are overpopulated and cause diseases, Lyme's disease, and it spreads to humans and can kill them. And the reason that they have increased in numbers is because we have just killed all the wolves and we've killed all the mountain lions that predated on them. So the only way to reduce numbers now is to go out and shoot them. But for some reason, hunting is now viewed as evil. It's actually a valid wildlife management tool because they have to be removed. There's too many of them. Okay. Ecological footprint. This is basically a measure of supply and demand on nature. You can look at various ecological footprints and trying to consider how your ecological footprint is. It basically says, okay, based on the amount of waste you produce and products you consume and energy you consume in your house, your car, your etc. If everybody had your level of impact on the environment, that's your ecological footprint, how many Earths would we need to supply enough land to provide that? And the big thing is, in the Northern Hemisphere, we have lived this life where we take an unfair share of the world's resources at the expense of other people. It is a zero-sum game. If other people increase their standard of living, then some people have to decrease theirs. It's not like everyone can have an American standard of living of consumerism, although that's what everybody wants. And that's going to end up biting us in the tuchus at some point. Here are a couple places. It's kind of fun to go look these up and calculate your ecological footprint. Cryptozoology. This is a new branch of science. It's been around for a lot longer than people, because most people, when they think of cryptozoology, it should be a Y there. So I'm going to fix that right now. Oops. And save it. All right. It's just the study of hidden animals, and people have been looking for these legendary animals for a lot of years, for centuries. The first type specimen of this guy was caught in 1847, and up until then, he was like the Bigfoot of Africa, the wild man of Africa. These guys, the Komodo dragon, rumors of a giant lizard, dragon-like, in Indonesia from sailors, abounded until somebody actually went to Komodo, it's an island of Komodo, and found these huge 14, 15-foot lizards that would run down, hunt, and kill deer. Giant panda was a myth until 1869, and science caught it. Here's a ferret badger. This was a species discovered in 2005 in Vietnam. The okapi, 1909, was when it was first discovered. Up until then, it was just this mythical, strange type of giraffe. It's from the Belgian Congo. The kraken, the giant, is probably, those legends came from these giant, colossal squid. Okay. Tigers in Europe. And then you get the more extreme cryptozoologies, the cryptids, you know, the Bigfoots, the Loch Ness Monster. We now know this is a hoaxed photo. This is a film by a guy named Richard Patterson, and if you want to have a lot of fun, go watch people argue if this is real or not. You know, good points on either. Here is another one from Loch Ness. This is an interesting photo nobody's ever been able to explain. It's an old tintype, and it almost looks like a pterosaur of some sort, and that's from the American Southwest. There's several of them. And these, they know they're not photoshopped because they're too old. And there are mentions in newspapers of these animals being shot and killed. This one was shot and killed out west during the Civil War. A cowboy shot this one. And, you know, there are the legends of the Thunderbird out west, and it's possible there might have been a small population still around back then in the more wild parts of North America, and they were killed and extirpated. Who knows? I've come to the conclusion that given all the animals that were myths until we caught them, as we get more knowledge of our world and access inaccessible places, we're going to continue to find big macro animals like this. What's really interesting about this Bigfoot or Sasquatch or Yowie or whatever you want to call them, here in the United States, there are laws, both locally, in some states, you know, that make it illegal to harm a Bigfoot. You can't hunt them, you can't kill them, you can't shoot them. They are protected. Cities, counties, states. There is even a blanket law federally that makes it illegal to kill an animal species unless you're a scientist doing a scientific study under the guidance of United States Fish and Wildlife Service of any unknown to science species. So if you go out into Oregon and see a Bigfoot and take a shot at him and kill him, you could be prosecuted under federal, state. Oregon has laws against killing or hurting Bigfoot. So that's pretty interesting stuff. So I'm not going to say that these species exist, but I'm not going to say they don't. Until I have data showing one way or the other, I'm just going to let time will tell. You know, as more data comes in, eventually we'll either find one or we won't. You know, it doesn't help that some of these more outrageous cryptids are often advocated for by people who are kind of on a fringe about what they believe these things are. I mean, there's some really bizarre, strange hypotheses. There's a group of people that think that Bigfoot are actually some kind of space alien, you know. So, I mean, you can find crazy people in a lot of different places. That wraps up this chapter.